Strasbourg today is a city of postcards. Half-timbered houses lean over canals. Cathedral spires cut the Alsatian sky. Tourists sip Riesling on cobblestone squares, and the air carries the scent of warm pretzels and river water. It is a place that feels settled, elegant, and profoundly European. Walk through its old quarter on a summer afternoon, and you might believe this city has always been gentle. But rewind 500 years, and gentleness is the last word anyone would use. In the summer of 1518, on these very streets, something happened that still defies full explanation. Hundreds of people began to dance. Not in celebration, not in ritual, not in any form recognizable as joy. They danced in a compulsive, trance-like frenzy, arms thrashing, bodies convulsing, feet pounding against cobblestones until the leather of their shoes split and blood pooled beneath them. They danced through the day. They danced through the night. They danced until they collapsed from exhaustion, until hearts gave out, until the city itself seemed to lose its mind. No war triggered it. No invading army marched through the gates. No edict from a king or pope set it in motion. It began with a single woman. Her name, or at least the name history remembers, was Frau Troffea. On July 14th, 1518, she stepped out of her narrow, half-timbered house onto the cobbled street and began to dance. There was no music, no audience she had invited, no festival or holy day to explain the movement of her limbs. She simply began and did not stop. Her husband watched. Neighbours gathered. At first, they may have laughed or shouted for her to come inside. But the hours passed, and Frau Troffea kept dancing. Her feet shuffled and stamped against the warm stones. Her arms swung without rhythm. Sweat darkened her clothing. The sun arced across the sky and fell behind the rooftops, and still she moved. Night came, and her silhouette twitched in the glow of distant lanterns. By morning, she was still going, her face blank, her body soaked, her breathing ragged but relentless. She danced for nearly 6 days. By the third day, something stranger began. Other people joined her, not friends, not family, strangers. A woman near the grain market started moving her feet in the same involuntary rhythm. A man on the bridge over the Ill River began twitching and could not stop. Within a week, more than 30 people were caught in the same invisible current. Some wept as they danced. Some screamed. Some simply stared ahead with glassy, empty eyes, their limbs jerking as if pulled by strings no one could see. The city's authorities, the Privy Council, the guild physicians, the clergy, watched with growing alarm. This was not drunkenness. It was not rebellion. It was not theatre. The dancers were not pretending. Their suffering was visible and worsening by the hour. Feet swelled, skin cracked and bled, muscles seized, faces twisted with exhaustion, and something that looked, to the people watching, like agony. And yet, they could not stop. What happened in Strasbourg that summer remains one of the most bizarre and best documented episodes in European history. It was not legend. It was not myth. It was recorded in physician notes, cathedral sermons, city council minutes, and multiple chronicles written in the decades and centuries that followed. The sources agree on the basic facts. One woman started dancing, others followed, and the city descended into a collective crisis that lasted more than a month and may have killed dozens, or even hundreds. But the question that echoes across 5 centuries is the simplest one, and the hardest to answer. Why? Why did they dance? Why couldn't they stop? Why did an entire city fall under the spell of a compulsion no one could name, no one could treat, and no one could explain? To understand the answer, or at least to approach it, we cannot start with the dancing itself. We must start with the world that made it possible. Because Frau Troffea did not step into a stable, prosperous city. She stepped into a place that was already broken. A place where hunger was constant, disease was everywhere, faith was laced with terror, and the boundary between sanity and madness had been thinning for years. Before we can understand why they danced, we must first understand what it meant to live in Strasbourg in 1518, and why, for so many of its people, the world had already become unbearable. To grasp the horror of what unfolded in the summer of 1518, you must first abandon every modern assumption about what a city is. Strasbourg, in the early 16th century, was not a metropolis in any sense we would recognize. It was a walled, dense, pungent organism of roughly 20,000 souls, pressed together inside fortifications that had been built to keep armies out, but also kept disease, poverty, and fear locked in. It was, officially, a free imperial city of the Holy Roman Empire. A designation that sounds grand, but meant, in practice, that Strasbourg governed itself through a tangle of guilds, councils, and ecclesiastical authorities, all jostling for influence under the distant and largely symbolic authority of the emperor. The city sat on the western edge of the empire, straddling the Rhine and the Ill rivers, a strategic crossroads for trade between the German lands, France, Switzerland, and the Low Countries. Merchants moved grain, wine, cloth, and timber through its gates. The guilds, tanners, carpenters, weavers, butchers, formed the backbone of civic life. The great red sandstone cathedral dominated the skyline, its spire the tallest structure in the known world at the time. From a distance, Strasbourg might have looked like a city that worked, but by 1518, it was a city in crisis. And the crisis was not a single event, it was a slow, compounding collapse that had been building for years.
The harvests had failed, not once, but repeatedly. The years leading up to 1518 saw a succession of poor growing seasons across the Upper Rhine region. Grain prices surged beyond what ordinary families could afford. Bread, the single most essential food for every person below the merchant class, became a source of daily anxiety. A labourer in Strasbourg might work 12 hours and still lack the means to feed himself by evening. The markets were not empty. They were simply too expensive for most of the city's population. Hunger alone would have been enough to destabilize the social fabric. But hunger was not alone. Disease arrived in overlapping waves. Syphilis, still relatively new to Europe and horrifyingly misunderstood, had swept through the city and left its mark in open sores, disfigured faces, and a pervasive sense of divine punishment. Smallpox struck repeatedly. Leprosy, though less common than in earlier centuries, still lingered at the city's margins. And the memory of the Black Death, the great pestilence that had decimated Europe less than 2 centuries before, was not a distant abstraction. It was a living inheritance, embedded in the prayers people recited, the saints they invoked, and the fear that God's wrath could descend at any moment without warning. Walk through the streets of Strasbourg in the spring of 1518, and you would have encountered a landscape saturated with suffering. The air near the river carried the stench of the tanneries, animal hides soaking in vats of urine and lime, a smell so thick it clung to your clothing. Near the market square, butchers tossed offal into open drains that ran between the houses. Flies gathered in clouds over piles of refuse. The narrow alleys between half-timbered homes were shadowed even at noon, and the sound of coughing, persistent, wet and ignored, was as constant as the church bells. There was no sewage system, no clean water supply in any modern sense. The Ill River, which wound through the city, served simultaneously as a source of drinking water, a dumping ground for waste, and a washing basin for laundry. The same water that a woman used to rinse her family's clothes in the morning might carry the excrement of her neighbor's household by afternoon. In this environment, disease did not so much arrive as simply never leave. And then there were the taxes. The guilds that governed Strasbourg extracted fees from nearly every transaction. The church demanded tithes. The nobility, though less powerful here than in feudal territories, still pressed their claims. For the poorest residents, those without guild membership, without land, without connections, the economic system was a machine designed to extract from them everything they had and give back almost nothing. The Bundschuh revolts, a series of peasant uprisings that had rumbled through the region in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, were a symptom of this pressure. Peasants in the surrounding countryside had risen up, demanding relief from taxes and tithes, invoking the laced boot, the Bundschuh, as their symbol. The revolts were crushed, their leaders executed. But the grievances that fueled them did not disappear. They simply sank deeper into the collective psyche. In this context, the people of Strasbourg were not just poor. They were trapped by walls, by disease, by hunger, by a political system that offered no recourse, and by a spiritual framework that told them their suffering was deserved. And it is this spiritual framework that matters most for understanding what would happen in July. The Catholic Church in early 16th century Strasbourg was not merely a religious institution. It was the lens through which ordinary people understood every event in their lives. Birth, illness, weather, death, fortune, disaster. God was not an abstract concept. He was an active, intervening force, as real as the bread on the table or the rain on the roof. And he was, above all, a judge. When harvests failed, it was because he was angry. When syphilis ravaged a household, it was because someone had sinned. When a neighbor died suddenly, it was a sign, a warning to the living that their own reckoning was coming. Among the many saints in the Catholic calendar, one held particular terror for the people of the Upper Rhine, St. Vitus. In most of Europe, Vitus was a relatively minor figure, a Christian martyr from the 4th century, patron of dancers, actors, and those afflicted with epilepsy. But along the Rhine and Moselle rivers, a more frightening tradition had taken root. Here, Vitus was believed to possess a specific and terrifying power. He could curse sinners with a compulsive, uncontrollable dance. This was not metaphor. It was doctrinal reality for the people who believed it. If you had sinned and Vitus turned his gaze upon you, your body would begin to move against your will. You would dance and you could not stop until the saint chose to release you, or until you died. This belief was not new in 1518. It had been circulating for at least a century and a half, reinforced by the memory of earlier dancing plagues. In 1374, a massive outbreak of dancing mania had erupted in Aachen, just north along the Rhine, and spread to towns across the Low Countries. Hundreds of people had danced in the streets, some for days, some until they collapsed. Smaller outbreaks followed in the decades after, along the same river corridors, in the same cultural territory, among people who shared the same fears and the same faith. Every European dancing plague between 1374 and 1518 occurred within this narrow geographic band. The pattern was not random. The belief system was regional, and it was powerful. So when Frau Troffea began to dance in July 1518, she was not acting in a vacuum. She was acting within a world that already believed such things were possible. A world where the curse of St. Vitus was as real as smallpox, where divine punishment was the default explanation for suffering, and where the boundary between fear and physical symptom had been eroding for years under the weight of famine, plague, and despair. The stage, in every sense, was already set. All that was missing was a spark, and the spark, when it came, did not arrive as an army or an earthquake or a decree. It arrived as a woman, alone, on a narrow street, moving her feet to music no one else could hear. Before the dancing began, there were ordinary days. And ordinary days in Strasbourg in 1518 were brutal enough without any curse from any saint. Imagine waking in this city, not as a merchant with a warm bed and a servant to stoke the fire, but as one of the thousands who made up the city's invisible majority. A tanner's assistant, a washerwoman, a porter hauling grain sacks from the river docks. You open your eyes in a room you share with others. The ceiling is low, the walls are damp plaster over timber, and the air smells of smoke, sweat, and something sour you stopped noticing months ago. There is no glass in the window, just a wooden shutter cracked open to let in a sliver of grey light. Outside, the cathedral bells are already ringing. It is not yet 5 in the morning. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is bread. A piece of dark, coarse rye bread that sits heavy in your stomach and does not quite fill it. There might be a cup of weak ale. There is no butter, no cheese. Those are luxuries that have drifted out of reach as grain prices climbed through the spring. You eat standing up or walking because there is no time to sit. The guildmaster expects you at the workshop before the second bell, and lateness is punished with docked wages you cannot afford to lose. You step outside. The street is narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people to pass without turning sideways. The upper stories of the half-timbered houses lean toward each other overhead, blocking the sky. The ground beneath your feet is a mixture of packed earth, cobblestones, and things you do not want to identify. A thin channel of water, grey-green and sluggish, runs down the centre of the lane, carrying waste toward the river. The smell hits you immediately, the sharp ammonia bite of urine from the tanneries downstream, layered over the sweeter rot of kitchen scraps, and the metallic tang of something dead nearby. A rat, perhaps, or a cat, or something worse. You are not shocked by any of this. This is what the city smells like. This is what it has always smelled like as far as you can remember. The streets are already filling. Porters push through with handcarts. Bakers shout prices from their stalls. A preacher stands on a corner near the cathedral square, his voice hoarse and urgent, warning of God's anger, of the wages of sin, of plagues yet to come. You do not stop to listen. You have heard variations of this sermon 100 times. But the words follow you down the alley like a draught of cold air. They settle somewhere in the back of your mind, alongside the hunger and the fatigue and the low, constant hum of anxiety that never quite goes away. At the workshop, the day begins in earnest. If you are a tanner, you spend your hours elbow deep in vats of animal hides, the chemical stench burning your nostrils, the liquid stinging cuts on your hands that never fully heal. If you are a carpenter, you work with adze and plane in a dim room where sawdust fills your lungs. If you are a weaver, you sit at a loom for 10, 12, 14 hours, your back curving into a shape it will never fully straighten from. The work is repetitive, physically punishing, and pays barely enough to cover the cost of bread and rent. There is no weekend, there is no vacation. There are holy days, feast days of the saints, Sundays when work is forbidden. But even these are not true rest. They are filled with obligations, mass confession, tithes, processions. The church demands your presence and your coin, and the penalties for absence are not trivial. A man who skips Mass too often invites suspicion. Suspicion invites scrutiny. Scrutiny in a world where accusations of heresy or witchcraft can destroy a life is something no one wants. By midday, the heat is oppressive. July in the Rhine Valley is humid and still. The sun beats down on the rooftops and the narrow streets trap the warmth like ovens. The smells intensify. Flies swarm over the market stalls where butchers display cuts of meat that have been sitting in the open air since dawn. Dogs, half feral, ribs visible, slink between the legs of passers-by, scavenging for scraps. Somewhere nearby, a woman is screaming. It might be an argument, it might be grief, it might be madness. No one investigates. There is too much to do, and screaming is not unusual. You eat again at midday if there is anything to eat. Another piece of bread, perhaps, or a thin soup of boiled turnips and onions. Meat is a memory for most. Fish from the river is cheaper, but the river is filthy, and the fish taste of it. You drink water from a communal well and try not to think about what flows into it from the streets above. Your stomach is never full, but the ache has become so familiar that you barely register it anymore. It is just part of the architecture of your days. In the afternoon, the city's other rhythms become visible. A procession of flagellants passes through the market square. Men and women stripped to the waist, beating their own backs with knotted cords, their skin striped with welts and dried blood. They cry out to God for mercy, for forgiveness, for relief from the suffering that has become the texture of daily life. Onlookers watch with a mixture of pity and recognition. This too is not unusual. Self-punishment has been a feature of religious life for as long as anyone can remember. When the world is unbearable and the cause is sin, the body becomes the instrument of atonement. Elsewhere, a man with the telltale sores of syphilis sits against a wall near the bridge, his face half covered by a rag. People step around him without looking. Syphilis arrived in Strasbourg within living memory, a disease so new that no one is entirely sure how it spreads, but everyone is certain it is a punishment from God. The infected are not treated, they are avoided. Their suffering is understood not as a medical condition, but as a moral verdict. As the afternoon wears on, the workshops begin to empty. Workers drift toward the taverns, the few places in the city where the weight of the day can be momentarily set down. Ale is cheap, conversation is loud, and for an hour or two the walls of the city feel less like a prison. But even here, the anxiety is never far from the surface. Talk turns to the price of grain, to the neighbour who died last week, to the preacher's warning about the end times, to the rumour that St. Vitus has cursed a woman in the next street. You laugh it off, or you try to. But the laughter catches in your throat because part of you believes it. Part of you has always believed it. The saints are real. Their power is real. And if Vitus can make a woman dance until she drops, what is to stop him from coming for you? Night falls and the city transforms. Without streetlights, without gas lamps, without any illumination beyond the occasional candle in a window or the glow of a watchman's lantern, Strasbourg after dark is a place of absolute shadow. The alleys that were merely unpleasant by day become threatening by night. Thieves operate freely. Drunks stumble into ditches. The city gates are barred and the watchmen call the hours, their voices echoing off the stone walls. You lie down on your straw pallet and close your eyes. Your body aches, your feet are sore, your stomach is empty. And somewhere in the darkness of your mind, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the hunger, beneath the accumulated weight of disease and poverty and fear, something is coiling. Something that has been coiling for years. You do not have a word for it. The physicians would call it overheated blood. The priests would call it sin. A modern psychologist might call it chronic. Compounding stress reaching a threshold beyond which the mind can no longer contain itself. You do not know what it is. You only know that it is there. And you know, in the way that a body knows things the mind cannot articulate, that something is about to break. Not tomorrow, perhaps, not the day after, but soon. The tanner's wife on your street has started talking about St. Vitus. She says she saw a woman dancing near the horse market, dancing alone, dancing for hours, dancing with no music and no joy and no sign of stopping. She says the woman's eyes were empty, like a puppet's. She says the woman's husband tried to pull her inside and she threw him off and kept dancing. You tell yourself it is gossip. You tell yourself it is nothing. But that night, as you lie in the dark, listening to the cathedral bells mark another passing hour, your feet twitch, just once, just slightly. And for a moment you will never speak of, a moment you will bury so deep that even you will forget it. You feel in the soles of your feet and in the marrow of your bones the faintest pull. Not quite a rhythm, not quite a compulsion, just a tremor, a whisper from somewhere below thought, below reason, below everything you understand about yourself. And then it passes, and you sleep. But across the city, Frau Troffea has not slept. She is still dancing, and by morning, she will not be alone. This tension had been building for years, in the empty stomachs, in the untreated sores, in the sermons about divine wrath, in the belief that a saint could seize your body and make it move against your will. It had been building in a city that offered its people no escape and no explanation except sin. It had been building in the silence between the cathedral bells, in the hours before dawn, when the only sound was the river carrying waste to the sea. And when it finally broke, it did not break as a riot or a revolt or a cry for help. It broke as a dance. A dance no one chose, no one understood, and no one could stop. A dance that would consume the city for more than a month, claim lives no chronicle would bother to count, and leave behind a mystery that 500 years of science and scholarship have still not fully solved. The explosion, when it came, took a form no one could have predicted, and the city's response would make everything worse.